Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Foundation Knowledge Assessment Preparation webinar, where we'll be looking at several top tips. This webinar is an overview of good practice delivery in relation to preparing learners for the Foundation in Construction and Building Services Engineering Qualification Knowledge Assessment. We cover top tips for delivery and provide support for delivery staff preparing learners for exams in the Foundation qualification. We're presenting this webinar from home, so please excuse any unwanted background noise and any potential delay in the slides. Today's host will be myself, David Pye, one of the technical advisors, Alison Whittle, post-16 technical advisor, along with other colleagues, Jason Howe and Anne Harrod and Amy Skinner, who are here to support with questions a little bit later on. Firstly, I would like to help you use the webinar platform to get the most out of the session. Please see the control panel on the side of the screen. You will see a questions tab where you can type your questions as we go through the webinar. We'll probably only be able to answer most of them at the end, but we may be able to answer some of them ongoing. There's also a chat tab, which is useful if you're having any difficulty with the audio or you just want to get a point across. You can use the chat tab. A copy of the presentation and the survey will be shared following the webinar. We've also put links to the survey in the chat tab. So now let's have a look at the agenda. We've got the welcome and introduction, which we've just covered. The overview, which again, we've just covered at the beginning of this webinar. The top tips, this is the main section. We'll go through 6 top tips around helping centres and therefore learners to prepare for the Foundation exam. Many of the tips follow a standard teaching and learning practice, so you may be already familiar with these types of approaches. But often these can be good as a refresher, and particularly for those who are new to teaching. Some of the top tips looks a bit more closely at exam questions, so we'll hopefully find that some of the top tips are useful for everyone. We'll cover more support, which covers the additional CPD events and ongoing support, and then take questions and answers. So hopefully that's what you've signed up for, and we hope you take a lot from this webinar. So, top tips. Here's our first top tip, planning the delivery. What we suggest here is that you look at when you would like your learners to take the exam. You know that there's a certain amount of content to be delivered over a period of time, and looking at the dates throughout the academic year, you've probably got in mind at the start of the year when you're doing your planning, around the time you would have delivered that content. It may be slightly different for different centres, dependent on your delivery pattern, but you'll have an idea. Be careful to bear in mind as well resits. So some best practice that we've picked up from other centres delivering these types of qualifications and similar ones with exams, that if you consider the week that you're sitting the exam, you can work backwards from that using the adaptable delivery planner, which is on the Skills for Wales website, ensuring that you've got the content covered. At this planning stage, if you've got a week in mind to take the exams, and then when you put all the information onto the planner, you'll see if you have given yourself enough time to deliver it. And then you can see if you've left enough time for any resits that might be required. Resits are quite interesting really, because you may have some learners who have done exceptionally well throughout the year and only just missed out on the exam. In which case, it's probably reasonable to have a shorter turnaround before they sit a resit. You may have other learners who've had some challenges along the way and really struggled in the exam. It would be more beneficial to consider some additional time before sitting a resit. So again, when we're looking at the start of the year on this planner, it's worthwhile factoring that in. Some of the bullet points there, just to pick a couple out: building time for revision and recap. So again, if you're looking at taking the exam in week 31, should we be looking to deliver all our content by week 30 or maybe week 28 to build in an extra couple of weeks? The other thing, when you're looking at the adaptable delivery planner, is consider the GLH for each unit. Again, a top tip is to proportion that evenly. I know it sounds quite straightforward, but I have seen plans from centres who've just split all the units up into weeks rather than considering extra weeks for extra content. Again, some of these things are quite basic, but it's worthwhile sometimes having a fresh look at this. If you've delivered it for a year, you may realise you need an extra couple of weeks on one unit, and another unit you may think, oh, okay, we got through that quite easily. So top tip number 2, preparing learners. Make use of a sample on-screen test. Now, there's a lot of information in the handbooks, but the sample test will give you and the learners an idea of how the questions and the answers are constructed. So it gives you a flavour. They're not the same questions though. We do get some feedback, and I remember from my own time in teaching that learners sometimes come out and say, oh, those were different questions than on the sample. Well, that will be the case. We can't use live questions, but they'll be on similar topics because they're all driven from the same handbook and learning outcomes. So it's well worth using those. And what we also recommend is creating an extra couple of questions. Yourselves, you've seen the content, you've seen the style. I had a tutor I used to work with used to write a couple of questions at the end of each lesson, 1 or 2, just as a recap for the last few minutes, but build up all those questions so at the end of the unit or in preparation for an exam, there will be they've already built up a bank that they can then share with the learners to work through as some additional mock assessment. That's a great tip really for some of the sessions we're hoping to run in the future, like sharing best practice. If each centre had developed even just half a dozen or so questions on topics, when we're sharing best practice across centres, we're building up a bank of mock questions. And the final bullet point there, make use of the HODA textbook section. There's lots of different sections in there, like test your knowledge, activities, and discussions. So they will help with the guided discussion, but we're looking predominantly at the exam today, the foundation exam, but there's still a good method for revision and supporting learners prior to assessment. So yeah, if you've not got that textbook yet, let us know. We can give you links to where you can purchase those or get inspection copies. And they're really helpful and useful. They're developed by HODA Education. So please have a look out for HODA Education if you haven't seen those already. So top tip number 3, be familiar with the assessment. So again, a lot of questions come up around how long is the assessment. This is a snip from the documentation on the Skills for Wales website. So we know that it's 70 minutes long. We know there's 45 multiple choice questions. There's no permitted reference material. Non-programmable calculators required. The test is online and marked electronically. And the pass mark of the sample paper is 22 out of 45. So you can see a grid on that snip, but that only refers to the sample test. So as you're working through that sample test, it will give you and the learners a bit of feedback, a bit of understanding of where those marks, what they relate to in terms of an assessment grade. Each year, the assessment will go through Angoff measuring, so that could be adjusted slightly each year. Okay. So top tip number 4, exam preparation. Identify key areas in the exam specification. So again, we see quite often people asking us, where do the questions come from? What type of content will be on the exams? Well, you have the sample, which helps, but this specification is really key because, for example, it will show how many questions are against each unit. So may not play a big part in your natural delivery, but think about those 2 or 3 weeks before the learner's taken the exam, or a learner who requires a resit who struggled in a particular area. We can target those areas they struggled with, and we can also target areas with a high proportion of questions per unit. For example, Unit 103, there's 14 questions. Unit 104, there's only 3 questions. So in terms of revision and preparing learners for the exam, it makes sense to concentrate or proportion your support around those units with a high proportion of questions. It's really helpful. We've put the bullet point there, utilise this for reinforcement and revision. The learners can understand and know where the high proportion of questions are coming from, and that should help target that revision session. Okay, thank you. I'll now pass you over to my colleague, Alison, who'll take you through the next couple of slides. Thank you, Alison.
Thanks, David. Hi, everybody. So really, my slides are just really going to sort of talk to you about those learners who normally solve a multiple choice question paper, just serially going from one question to the next. And in some cases, that's not necessarily the best approach for them, particularly if the type of learner that is constantly having to resit their exams. So I'm just going to talk you through a couple of hints and tips that I use when I'm sort of working with teachers on multiple choice question papers. And I think one of the most important success criteria for any multiple choice question paper is time management. I'm sure that you've had experienced this in the past, that many learners, when they're given a multiple choice question exam, believe that they're very simple. They don't need a methodical approach to solve. And some will probably even think by selecting all C's that they stand a 25% chance of passing, regardless of reading the questions. Well, that isn't the case, as you will know. So just a couple of tips for you here. Always have a clock in the room if you can, and make sure that your learners don't leave the room until the end of the exam, because as often happens with learners, they'll rush through the exam to get finished early so they can leave. So get them to plan the maximum number of minutes that they spend on each question. And that way, they can either make sure that they won't spend more than a specific amount of time on each question or less, particularly if you make sure that they don't go early. The method I think is always worked in some learners is the ED method, and it only ever works in multiple choice exams. And this is just a hint, because you'll have those learners that are very capable, know everything practically, can recite the things to you, but just can't get through this exam, which is quite frustrating, not only for you but for them as learners. So one of the tips is, if you give that learner a piece of paper and a pencil before the exam, and just get them to write down how many questions 1 to 45, just numbers 1 to 45 down the left-hand side of their page, and that's to do with 45 questions. So if what I do is, this is a method that's used to train learners, which one of the ways is you say to them, right, spend the first 10-15 minutes or so skimming through those questions, scrolling up and down. I've checked you can do it, it's an online exam. And as they go through the questions before answering anything, they'll start to notice some what I call easy to solve, straightforward questions. Then they'll see some sort of moderately different questions, moderately difficult questions, and then there'll be some that really seem hard to do for them or difficult. So get them, as they're scrolling through, to mark on the piece of paper next to the question E for easy, the ones that they can answer easily. Get them to put M for the ones that they think, oh, not sure about that one, but it's a bit more difficult, and get them to put D next to the most difficult ones. Now, the second part of this includes answering those questions, starting with the easiest ones. In other words, the ones that they've marked as D. And that hopefully will boost the confidence Then they can continue with the M questions and then the D questions for the last part of it. Remind them again, though, not to spend more than the allocated time on each question. And the remaining time left should go to tackling those, what I call the D questions, the more difficult multiple choice questions. And then they can make those educated guesses for those tougher questions rather than leave them out. If we look onto elimination, this is another tried and tested method over the years. And of course, the general formula for any multiple choice question solution is to try and enhance the chance of the correct answer. And that way you do is by eliminating all the possible incorrect answers. So hopefully by reducing the number of incorrect answers, they may find they're only left with 1 or 2 options on occasion. And then you have got a 50-50 educated guess at picking one of those. Another strategy we have is look at all the options later. You know your learners, you know best. And this is for get learners to simply read the question and then try and answer it in their mind before they've seen all the options. Then if the question that they first thought of is there among the various responses, then that should be their response to that, or their answer to that particular question. Another hint here that you can share with your learners, keep an eye out for qualifiers. And qualifiers are these phrases that tend to make an absolute declaration to something. They tend to make an answer wrong. So words like always, never, none, and every, they may reflect a misleading response, because as an example, that can be too extreme. So what these qualifiers do is they take a fact that is true, but tend to exaggerate it to the extreme. For instance, they'll insist something is always true, when in reality it's possibly only sometimes, or it's never, and that's too strong an answer. So what in reality, the best thing to do is, if you see a question with always, never, none, and every, unless they know that to be absolutely the case and it's irrefutable, it's very often what we call a qualifier, and it's the wrong exam, particularly if it can be sometimes or not always. So just to give you a hint for those questions there. The second one is answer all questions. Yeah, absolutely. 50-50 chance once you've eliminated the ones you know to be incorrect, that learners should eliminate any alternatives which are obviously wrong or completely unfamiliar to them, because some learners sort of think if it's a word that's unfamiliar, it must be right, when actually it's usually the opposite that's wrong. If it's unfamiliar, it's most likely it's not going to be the correct answer. And then, of course, get them to revisit those difficult questions at the end, time allowing, and then and only then should learners make an educated guess rather than leave any questions unanswered. So I'm just going to move on to my next slide and give some examples of what I'm talking about here. So we said there that many learners tend to fall down with exams, and in most cases it's not because they haven't got the knowledge, but the majority of time it's because they haven't understood the question fully. And this is what we find right across the board, particularly in after the last couple of years, where we've had the most sort of, I hate to say the word, but it's constantly unprecedented with COVID, where those learners have come to you either not having the skills they should have done taking the exams, or they've lost those skills over taking the exams. So obviously, you've got a much harder job than you would have normally had. So here are a couple of examples, and I've taken these from the sample paper, and these are the ones I've picked out that are most likely going to cause problems for some learners. So looking at question 1, I'm just going to sort of go down and then across. A key word in this question is cultural. And if you've got learners that don't understand what the word cultural means, they're never going to be able to answer that question. So it's just, don't assume that some of these key words are, that learners understand all of those key words. If we move down to question 5, this is a prime example here, and it's got here, I've highlighted in red the word best. So the word best in this question suggests that more than one of these marketing methods could be used. But the key words here are small trade business. So the other options tend to all relate to international, national and social influencers, which tend to have a worldwide following. So what they're saying in that is none of these are wrong, but which method would be best? So just a critical keyword. Question 3. The word primary in this question is key to that learner understanding the question. In other words, primary meaning is the most important, major or main purpose of that particular thing. Other 2 key words in this question are assess and survey. Now, learners must know the meanings of those in order to choose the right answer. And learners tend to select answers that have words in, as I said before, that they don't use often because it's an exam, and they seem to think that the exam is trying to catch them out, which isn't the case. You know, exams are not there to do that. So in question 4, which is, this is a really hard one for learners to do, because the key words here are 2, best and reduce. Now, it's got what, to me, this is one of the more difficult multiple choice questions because it has 3 instructions in the question, and potentially all of these could be used. So if they only select one answer for this, it will be marked wrong because it's asking for 2 correct answers for 1 mark. And common mistakes that learners make on these types of questions, they just don't read the question properly, rush through it, and often miss out one of these critical keywords like best or reduce. And my very last really tip and hint for you is I would carry out a quick exercise with your learners who struggle to pass these exams, and just get them to pick out some keywords in any sample multiple choice questions to make sure that they understand the importance of reading the questions properly and they understand the meaning of all the words in the sample papers. And of course, just looking at question 2 quickly before I hand back to David, which trade occupation would most likely work with stonemasonry? So what they're saying is it's possibly that they would all work with stonemasonry, but of course the most likely one is trowel. So it's just getting them to pick those out. So I hope that's been a little bit helpful. So I'm going to hand back to David now for the next to finish off in the next few slides. Thanks, David. You're on mute, David.
The old classic mute. Thank you very much. That was great. Thank you very much, Alison. I hope everyone found that useful. It was really interesting, I think, to have an insight into the construction of some of those questions. It's something I have mentioned before when we've been out and about, but I think Alison described it very well there, and talking about the primary purpose or the best. It doesn't necessarily mean the 3 others are incorrect. It's just that one is more correct. And I think understanding that and some of the other little tips hopefully help you understand how the excuse me, the questions are constructed, and therefore help the learners. So we'll open over to questions in a moment, but just go through some of the ongoing support that we have currently. We have a series of short videos. So if you remember from some previous webinars and sessions that we've run where we've done 8 steps to success, we've broken those down into individual videos. So there's a link at the bottom of the screen there. They're on the Skills for Wales website under resources, and some of these are just a couple of minutes long, and they're just meant to be supportive for providers. If you've just got a few queries on IQA or a few queries on planning, you can just drop into that very short video and hopefully that will answer it for you. So hopefully make use of those. They're certainly worthwhile sharing with colleagues and staff, making people aware of these as part of your IQA planning activities and your meetings that you have, and making sure that hopefully they're used. There's a number of focus groups that are planned. I know colleagues Ian Roberts and Jason Howe have planned numerous activities, and here you can see on the screen a list of that further support with the time. So these focus groups, as Jason says here, as a great opportunity for teaching staff to get together and share practices, network, and create relationships. So we'll coordinate and help facilitate these groups, but the idea is that the providers, the centres, the staff come along and share a lot of their own best practice. So things that have been working well for you, it'd be great for you to bring that along, share those ideas with others, and also any questions that you may have written or support material, and it just makes it easier for everyone if we can share that. In recognition of the CPD event success last year, we've decided to continue with those. So the previous ones looked at the foundation and progression, and the new ones we'll be looking at the level 3 qualifications. We start those tomorrow, so we have 2 of those already booked in for tomorrow. So the half-day sessions, they'll cover delivery, assessment, a little bit more detail than maybe we've done before. We'll have a look at the employee confirmation guide again, but maybe not in a lot of detail because we've covered that several times before. Bit of an update on the quality assurance process as we all get more familiar with it and it becomes more refined. And again, it's another opportunity for networking, so sharing all that best practice and all the good experiences that you have with these qualifications so far. And there's a link at the bottom there for signing up for the updates. We have a dedicated LinkedIn group that Jason has set up. There's a QR code on the screen. You will get a copy of this presentation. So you can use the link at the bottom or the QR code, or if you've got a phone to hand at the moment, you've got this on your screen, you might have time to open up your QR code and follow that link. The idea of the LinkedIn group is we want to be supportive of each other. We want to create an environment where everyone is comfortable sharing their experiences. And if you've had a good experience, you develop something that's good, or you've got an answer to something that you think others may benefit from, if we can create a very supportive community on LinkedIn, then everyone benefits. So if you're on LinkedIn, please look that up. Please join us. Put a welcome post on there, or if you've got any experiences or if you have any questions, drop it on there, and hopefully we'll get everyone supporting each other. So that was the presentation, relatively short compared to some webinars, but quite on purpose because we wanted to get to the point and try and support you with exams and resits and preparing learners for resits and understanding the questions and approaches. So hopefully you found that valuable and beneficial. Some of it we know you're probably aware of anyway, and experienced tutors probably do a lot of the tips that we've spoke about, but hopefully it was a nice refresher and you took something from it. But what we'll do now is we'll stay on the webinar as long as we need to, and please share with us any questions that you might have about the foundation exam, particularly anything that you'd like to see from us, any additional support you'd like on top of what we've got, anything at all really that we can help with. So I'm just going to bear with me a moment, please, while I open up the questions tab. Okay, just a little bit of feedback on the exam sections, saying found it useful. That's very welcome. Thanks. We appreciate the feedback. And again, please have a look at the chat and do follow the survey. I know we're always asking you to complete the surveys and we may be a bit of a pain, but please do try to access that survey and share your thoughts. It's our primary way of hearing from you about what you found useful, what you'd like to see in future, what we can do better. So if you don't mind just taking a few minutes to complete that survey, we'd really appreciate it. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, if indeed anyone has any, can I just open up the panel, please? Are there any additional points you'd like to make, Alison, that maybe you didn't make, or anything you'd like to reinforce?
Mine was very short, I'm afraid. It wasn't. It was sort of just giving you some pointers, really. As I think the most difficult thing is it's so hard for tutors, you know, when learners constantly have to keep taking the same exam. And I think my only last hint is if they've, as I said before at the beginning, if they've just gone through starting off with question 1 and working right the way through and still not getting through, then I think possibly the best advice would be to change the approach to that and maybe use one of the methods. You know, some learners take longer to settle into exams than others. Some will rush them through. So, as I say, you know, the multiple choice exams, they're a very different beast to any normal exams, in such a way that, you know, medical is used all multiple choice, and I think we use the, you know, certain methods of setting these exams, and there will always be distractors in them, and there'll always be certain ways to set up. But I think the best advice I can give is they're not easy, you know, they're not and learners will approach it because they know the right answers there. So if that's just my hint, is just get them to take it very seriously. Don't rush through it and think that's over with, I'm going, because nobody likes to sit an exam, really, and if you do, then, you know, you're the first person I've met.
Thank you very much, Alison. We've got a few questions come in. We recently had a learner pass with 20 out of 45. Yeah, it goes through an hang-off process each year. So it could be that one year it's a different pass mark than another year. The pass marks that are in the documentation, which we shared on the presentation, are aligned to the sample assessment, and it's safe to say it will be similar, but we can't guarantee it the same each year. I've got a colleague, Amy. I don't know, Amy, if you could expand on that anyhow.
Oh, hi, David. Yeah, so just to kind of add what you said already, after we have sittings come in, we kind of look at the data, look at the assessment performance, look at the candidate performance, and we kind of calibrate that boundary so that whatever version they take, they'll get the same outcome as if they're taking a different version, kind of covering that same trade. So yeah, if we identify that the level of demand is slightly higher, and it's a bit more of a challenging test, then that'll be reflected in the boundary, and it might be that the boundaries are kind of slightly lower. So yeah, kind of, I suppose, just to reassure you, a lot of kind of data work goes on to kind of set those boundaries, and there'll always be kind of a rationale behind where they're set, to kind of make sure candidates aren't disadvantaged at all.
Yeah, lovely, excellent, thank you very much.
And just
we've got another question. How many attempts should we be giving learners to pass the exam? Well, there's no limit as such on the amount of attempts, but in terms of resits, there should be sufficient time for some further training and support with the learner, and that would be proportionate to how well they are doing on the programme. So if they've you know, you may get learners who've got poor attendance or have struggled in mock exams and struggled with little activities that they've been set, and they've not been successful with the exam, in which case it wouldn't be wise to put them back in without some sufficient retraining. So I suspect time would be a factor in the end, because if you're looking to get them through within the academic year, you'd have to ensure that they've got the appropriate support before they went back in. You know, it would still be part of your thinking and support, and then you'd have to work with that learner if they were continually unsuccessful despite lots of interventions of support. Then it would be working with that learner to see if this is the appropriate program for them, or if they have any other support needs that you may want to access as a provider. So yeah, there's no limit other than your own planning and support around that learner. So I see one question: have you got a link to the online mock exam? And Jason has typed a response. Thanks, Jason. I don't know if you got audio at the moment, or you can just type. you want to explain that response as well, or have you not got audio? Okay, Jason may be struggling with audio, but I can read out the response. You can probably see it. Sample and mock exams are booked via the wall garden. So that's the method of accessing the mock exams or sample exams now.
David, can I just follow up on a couple of links? The survey link's not in the chat today, but it will be in the follow-up email. And I've also put a link in the chat to the LinkedIn group as well, in case anybody missed it when it was on the screen. So the survey link will come in the follow-up email, and the link to the LinkedIn group is in the chat. Also, there was a question coming around focus groups for plumbing and electrical. Again, in the follow-up email, it might actually be on this slide deck you've got. There is an email address people can contact to ask that question of colleagues at EL.
Thanks, Jason. I've managed to find the links to the survey and been able to drop those in. So hopefully people can see those. So I might be able to drop them in the questions as well. Let's see if that'll work. So there's an English and a Welsh version. So hopefully that's come through as well. Okay, well, we don't have any further questions at the moment. We won't stay on any longer than we need to. We can let you go about your busy schedules. So before we do close, are there any final questions? So your last chance to type away a question, or we can open it up for audio if you prefer. Just let us know. Whilst you're thinking about those, just a big thank you to Alison Whittle, who's put together part of these slides and the presentation. Jason and Amy and Mita, all for supporting on this webinar. So yeah, big thank you to everyone for your support. To all the delegates, we hope you found it useful. Any questions or anything we can support with after today, because I know what it's like. Sometimes you walk away from these and you remember, oh, I should have asked that question. You can get in touch direct or through the Skills for Wales website. There's a contact us section. So please make use of those. And again, anything else that you think of, you can put in the survey as well. So any thoughts or questions, we'll get access to a completed survey and we can go into there. And if you want to follow up from us, please remember to put in your own details so we know who to follow up with. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it useful. There's the one of the contact email addresses I've just mentioned, and I cannot see any further questions, so I suggest we close.
I'm sorry, David, there is one just come in.
All right, okay.
Is there going to be a session on how centres are managing plan do review? Not so much a session, but that's certainly something that could be covered in the focus groups if you want to bring that along and share experiences, or you know, gain advice from colleagues in other centres. Then that's the purpose of them focus groups. So please, Chris, if you're not a part of those, ping me an email and I can add you to the list. But yeah, sorry, that was the very last one. My apologies.
No, that's fine. Thanks for jumping in. I didn't see that one come in just there. So thank you very much for that, Jason. And yeah, once again, thanks very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and your evening. And we may catch up with some of you tomorrow or over the next couple of days as we start our CPD sessions. So safe travels and see you all soon, hopefully. Goodbye.